Hello friends. So if you've been following the channel recently, you probably know that I recently inherited this Minolta SRT 101 from my grandfather. And this camera came from the 1960s and 70s. It also came with 4 different lenses. So recently I got this last Christmas actually. I got this converter right here. So this converter is a converter for Sony E-mounts to Minolta RF-mount. So I got this because I thought it would be sort of an intriguing value proposition. I have these 4 vintage Minolta lenses that came with this camera, and I thought it might be interesting to check how well these lenses work on a modern camera mount system. It's kind of an intriguing value proposition because you look at this and you think, okay, if I have vintage lenses like this and I have a modern camera body, could I save a lot of money? Because new lenses, new digital lenses, especially full frame lenses, cost a lot of money. Like they aren't cheap. You can easily spend $1,000, $2,000 on a good full frame lens. So if you have something that worked well in the day, this is a 35 millimeter lens right here. And if you could adapt it to your current mirrorless system, then, or maybe even a DSLR or something like that, you can get these for pretty cheap. Often in pretty good condition. You might have to. It might be a bit of a crapshoot as you look around eBay and stuff like that. But maybe you can get something pretty good, pretty cheap. So I thought in order to test that out, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to make a video called "Guess the Lens." So I took the same picture with the same camera, one using a modern digital lens, and then one using one of these vintage lenses. So I thought I would, first of all, just post them here. You can look at both of them, guess which one it is, and then we can try and answer the question of if these might be a better value than modern digital lenses. So first up, let's meet our lenses. The first one we have here, this is the one I'm looking at right now. It's the Minolta Rockor 35 millimeter lens. I think Rockor is Minolta's branding for their own lenses. So this one is, yeah, as stock gets. This is a 35 millimeter prime, maximum aperture of f2.8. This one, it's the widest lenses of the ones I have. This is, it's not a wide angle lens by modern standards, but you can use it for things like landscapes and stuff like that. And it's very light, very compact. And then the second one is the Minolta 58, I believe. Let me check. Yes, this is the one I'm using right here. So it's a similar lens. This one has a 58 millimeter focal length. And these are called, of course, they're both prime lenses. Yeah, this one is my favorite of the Minolta lenses. It gives, I think, I heard something like 50 millimeters is generally about what the human eye sees at. So it gives a somewhat tight view. It's kind of nice and appealing. This one opens up pretty wide. It's a f1.4 lens. So this is the one I've used the most with the Minolta and the one I like the most. And then we also have the Tamron. This is 70 to 210 millimeters. I guess Tamron has made a lot of lenses like this. This one, I think, can be distinguished by the 46A model number. So this one, yeah, it's a push-pull zoom lens. I think it dates a little later. It's from the 80s or so. And this is the only zoom lens I have for the Minolta. And then for the digital lens, we have the Sigma 28 to 70 DGDN. I think that's what they call their full-frame lenses, which were developed for mirrorless systems, not adapted DSLR lenses. So this is a modern digital lens. Some of you who are familiar with the Sony E-mount ecosystem might know that there's a higher-end lens in a very similar category. This is a 24 to 70. I went with a 28 to 70 because it was on sale at the store where I bought it, and it's also lighter, so it's easier to balance on a gimbal. So this is a standard modern digital lens. It zooms. It talks to Sony E-mount. It's essentially, it's the kind of thing you could buy on a modern mirrorless lens ecosystem. And I'm shooting all of these on a Sony Alpha 7 IV body. So all right, let's dive into the comparisons. So I have 4 shots right here. I shot all of them with either with one of 2 lenses. And I also have a 200 millimeter prime for the Minolta, but I don't have a digital lens with that focal length, so I left it out of the comparisons. So for this first shot, I'm going to compare the Sigma and the Tamron. So this is a cup, just a standard cup I had in a room. I think I shot them both at 70 millimeters. So what I'll do is I'll show you one picture, the second picture, and let you judge which one you think it is. So for the first one, the cup, we have shot A and shot B. So one more time, that's shot A and shot B. Okay, for the second picture, this is more of a landscape shot. I shot this with the Minolta 35. And I should mention, for all of these shots, I tried to shoot them as close to the same frame as I could. These are all handheld, so they're definitely not perfect. The field of view is going to change slightly. And I should say, I'm no pro, I'm no expert. So these are going to be a little, well, these aren't going to be a scientific comparison or anything like that. But, I think we can have some basis for comparison. So let's look at shot B. This is a landscape shot. I shot it with Minolta 35 and the Sigma. So let's look at shot A and shot B. So once again, that's shot A and shot B. Okay, so for the third one, this is flowers I found. This is with the Minolta 58 and the Sigma. So here's shot A and shot B. Shot A, shot B. All right, so the fourth comparison shot right here, this is a sign. I accidentally shot this in RAW. All of the other shots are JPEGs, but I'm just going to leave this as RAWs. So this is a sign, and I shot this with a Sigma and the Minolta 35. So here's shot A and shot B. Shot A, shot B. Okay, so let's check the answers. So first, let's go to the cup picture. So shot A was the Sigma, actually the modern lens. And shot B was the Tamron, the vintage lens. So the biggest difference I found between these, and of course, yeah, you can see I didn't get the focus quite perfectly aligned in both of them. The biggest difference is the Tamron has this cat's eye bokeh, so you can really see the bokeh patterns are quite different. And this will be a pattern we'll see in a lot of these other shots, is that the Sigma produces much rounder bokeh. I think it depends on the focal length and a lot of things like that, but generally, yeah, you'll see the bokeh on the Tamron, much more cat's eye effect. I think those are specular highlights, I believe, those light points. But the Tamron did a pretty good job. It's not especially, I don't know, it's not like it's unappealing or anything like that, but we do see that difference in bokeh shape. That might be the easiest one to tell. And then we might have a little chromatic aberration, I think, on things like the cup. You could see some of that. And this was another big thing I noticed with the vintage lenses, and I'll get into this more, but chromatic aberration rears its head quite a lot more with the vintage lenses. So let's look at the landscape shot next. So in the landscape shot, shot A was the Minolta, and shot B was the Sigma. So I should say this landscape was shot probably at the end of December, so there isn't a lot of color in it, or it's not as colorful as it would be later in the year. But for the most part, these were very similar. I was impressed. Even I didn't notice any chromatic aberration, or not a lot of obvious in the parts of the image where the bright leaves were, or the leaves were against the bright sky. The only difference I could really tell, at least at a glance, was that the Sigma seemed to have slightly deeper colors. The greens were a little greener, I guess. That might be something you could correct in post. But by and large, I was pretty impressed with how well the 35 held up here. The only thing I found with the 35 in my testing is that shooting landscape shots are a little... if I set the focus to infinity, it'll often mean the things farthest away are out of focus. I kind of have to set it to infinity, then dial it back a little. That seems to produce a sharper focus. I don't know if that's just a quirk of the lens, of this lens, or that's always how it's been. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I found that focusing to infinity is something you want to avoid if possible, on the 35 at least. So next, let's go to the flowers. So for the flowers, shot A was the Minolta, and shot B was the Sigma. So this was this really brought into contrast just how much better the colors are in the Sigma. Just brighter colors, more subtlety, and this was in-camera JPEG, so I wasn't processing it in RAW or anything like that. The bokeh was very similar. I didn't find that was a big difference, but yeah, just brighter, nicer colors on the Sigma for sure. And again, maybe it could be corrected in post. Maybe one might find the more muted colors of the Minolta more appealing, depending on the situation. But that was a big difference I noticed. So last, the sign photo. So maybe I'll show this one more time. Shot A. Maybe I'll put the corners in focus here. Shot A look like this, and shot B looked like this. So the colors are all very similar. Obviously, the focus was a little different because I had to hand focus the Minolta lens. But shot A was the Sigma, and shot B was the Minolta 35. So the biggest difference I found right here was the kind of notchy characteristic of the bokeh. So if you split in the corners, the specular highlights, the bokeh has this very notchy look to it. The Sigma has obviously been tuned to have sort of rounder, smoother bokeh, even in the specular highlights. And I think that's kind of what people want nowadays. It was probably more difficult to do that. It might have something to do with the shape of the aperture blades or just the construction of the lens. But yeah, we see smoother bokeh in the Sigma, which I think is a little more appealing, but maybe that's something that's up to personal taste. So those were the comparisons. So I guess my experience first let me talk about my experience of actually using this converter. So it was actually surprisingly easy. This converter was only something like maybe $30. It's very cheap, and I think there are other converters of a similar price. So yeah, the converter is very easy to use. You just literally take the Minolta lens, line up the red dot, align it like so, then click, and then this thing goes on the camera body. And the Sony, to its credit, recognizes that there's some kind of external lens on it. It doesn't fight you or anything like that. It's not trying to tell you like, hey, this is a unauthorized lens or anything like that. It just lets you do it. So you have it on the body like this, and then so the huge difference between this lens and between the vintage lenses and modern lenses is no autofocus. So there are, in fact, there are lenses that don't use autofocus even today for Sony E-mount and other mount systems like that. And I think, the converter, it doesn't have any sort of like those electric doodads. I don't know what they're called, the little silver bits, if they're diodes or whatever. It doesn't have that, so the camera body can't talk to the lens. There's no focus motors or anything like that. So it can't talk to the lens. It just simply accepts the picture it's given. It won't do that half focus thing where it's if you press the button halfway down, it'll confirm the focus spot. None of that, because the camera has no idea what the lens is doing or what it's talking to or what it's trying to focus on. And that also means that there's no EXIF data for the lens in the image files, so you're not going to know what the aperture was, which might be important when you're trying to dial down your settings or decide what you want to work on next time. So you do have that weakness. There's no EXIF data. You have to manually focus, and a modern high-resolution camera body like this Sony has, I think, a 33 megapixel sensor. That means that any miss in focus is really going to be very obvious. If you shrink the image down, maybe it won't be too noticeable. But you also lose the ability to get that punch-in focus. So on a camera, on a lens that can talk to the camera, even if you're doing a manual focus, like spinning the manual focus ring, the camera will know that you're doing that and will kind of zoom in on one part of the image that it thinks you're trying to focus on to help you get very precise focus. But with these lenses, there isn't anything like that. There might be a setting somewhere in the Sony that lets you maybe put a button to that manual focus punch-in window. I'm not quite sure. I didn't go deep enough to find that out. But manual focus is a challenge then. Of course, you had to do it in the film days. There was no autofocus on this Minolta. But it does add some overhead, some headache. Sometimes I've had test shots with this where I was out of focus. I had to do it a couple of times, and fortunately with digital, you can at least confirm that in camera. You don't have to develop film to do that, but it's a hassle. Especially the Sony, which the Sony's cameras are often well regarded for their autofocus. So having to manually focus is a bit of a chore. There are new lenses where you have to do that as well. But that is probably the biggest difference in vintage lenses versus modern digital lenses. And then, yeah, as we've seen, there is more chromatic aberration. This is a shot I took with a 200 lens, which shows quite a lot. This is a hard thing to correct for. I think lens makers today are still, there's coating and things like that on the lenses that attempts to compensate for chromatic aberration. That you can try and work on it in post. But without EXIF data and maybe without some of the lens calibration information, it's harder for programs like Lightroom to compensate for chromatic aberration on vintage lenses. And as we've also seen, the bokeh shape is perhaps not quite as appealing. Maybe modern sensibilities go for a rounder, smoother bokeh, and it's a subjective advancement across lens development through the decades. So I guess going back to my original thesis here, my original idea, does this converter mean that you don't need digital lenses? Well, as you can guess, probably not. You do have to manually focus. You do have to worry about chromatic aberration, bokeh, and possibly other things like flare. And while I think it makes a very fun thing to play around with, it's good if you just enjoy taking pictures and you have vintage lenses. It does make kind of a fun thing you can just play around with, use to your liking. I would say it does not replace digital lenses unless you're very comfortable with all of those compromises and just have no problem with them. Autofocus is very, very useful, especially if you're trying to get something like a moving picture, right? Like a moving subject, or if you're taking video. And I do think that, you get better color, probably sharper images using modern lenses. But given, if you can get this converter for cheap enough and you have vintage lenses, it's a lot of fun to play around with. There's no reason why you couldn't. So I hope that was a little fun. I might try and go in and review these lenses a little individually as I take more pictures with them using the converter. And next up, I have one more roll of black and white film. Actually, as you can see, I have the yellow filter right here on the lens. So I have another roll of black and white I'm taking with a Minolta. So I think I am, about 24 shots through that roll. So I think once I get those developed, I'll maybe make another quick video to go through some of those because it's been fun doing that. And I have another camera coming pretty soon. Actually, another one of my grandfather's cameras, which is a German camera, actually, not a Leica, but a good German camera. So that's coming soon. I hope to play around with that, and maybe I'll make another video about that. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.